I thought for most of my life that the menstrual cycle was just a source of shame, a burden to bear. Cramps are just supposed to be inherently painful. You know, your luteal phase is supposed to ruin your life. I now know that when you honor your cycle and when you work with and tap into the powers of your cycle and work with your body, it doesn't have to feel that way.
Hey, I'm Hannah, your host of Too Much, Not Enough. After a life-threatening burnout in 2021, I released the brittle version of success that was slowly killing me and built a life that feels as good as it looks. This podcast is for ambitious, soul-led humans ready to stop shrinking and start living big, bold, fully aligned lives. So if you've ever felt like too much and not enough, join me and my guests as we take an unfiltered deep dive into why being the real you was never the problem, and how to create a life your nervous system actually likes. Let's get into it. It wasn't until very recently, in my mid-30s, that I really started to get to know my body, my cycle, and the different phases it goes through every month. Growing up, I tried out different birth control methods, tried the pill. For me, it didn't work. It made me severely depressed. I tried the NuvaRing, and then more recently, I had an IUD in for about 5 years. And when I took that out and decided that I wanted to start preparing my body for pregnancy, I really started tracking my cycle and understanding the different phases that I go through every month. And it was a real eye-opener for me. I've learned a lot since I started paying attention to my cycle. But if you're anything like me, you probably felt like your body was a mystery, or worse, something to just deal with. And you're not alone in this feeling. Most of us grew up with little to no real education about our hormones, our cycle, or the fact that we even move through different phases every month. It was all just don't get pregnant and deal with the symptoms, manage them as best you can, right? But what if your cycle wasn't something to dread, control, or even fight against, but instead a blueprint for clarity, energy management, and dare I say it, ease? Once I started seeing the various phases of my cycle as gifts, menstruation being a release, follicular as this beautiful new energy, ovulation as peak magnetic power, and luteal as a truth teller and a time to retreat and reset, things really shifted for me. And that's why today I've invited Consciously Cait onto the Too Much, Not Enough podcast. She's a fertility awareness educator and content creator for all things menstrual and TMI, which we know I love. Cait approaches menstrual health with an evidence-based lens sprinkled with just the right amount of woo, and helps passionate, intuitive, brilliant women like you listening right now finally feel like things click. Whether they're charting to avoid pregnancy, support conception, or simply understand their hormone health more deeply, she is your cycle BFF. So in this conversation, we're breaking down the shame around menstrual health, normalizing cervical mucus chats. Yeah, you heard that right. And diving into how your cycle impacts you all month long, not just during your bleed. Cait is going to share how cycle syncing can transform the way you work, rest, and live, why ovulation is the true star of your cycle, and how fertility awareness methods can help you confidently avoid or achieve pregnancy naturally. Yeah, you don't have to go on the pill if you don't want to. Plus, Cait is going to give us a peek into her one-on-one program, the FAM Formula, part course, part personalized support, that's helping women step into trust with their bodies and finally feel like they're in the driver's seat of their own hormonal health. So let's get into it. Welcome to Too Much, Not Enough, Cait. How are you today?
Oh, I'm so good. Just enjoying every single peach I could get my hands on. How are you?
Oh my gosh. I actually have a peach tattooed on me because summer peaches in Ontario are like, they're magical. They're a spiritual experience.
They are.
I'm so happy you said that. All right. Well, let's kick things off by letting the listeners know more about you, can you share a little bit about yourself, maybe a fun fact, as well as your story? What brought you into fertility awareness education and becoming the cervical mucus nerd that you are now very well known as on the internet?
Yes, I do talk almost exclusively about cervical mucus online. Yes. Hi. If you don't know who I am, I'm Cait. I am a fertility awareness educator and a cyclical strategist. So on one hand, I help people avoid pregnancy naturally or help them achieve pregnancy, because it's kind of the same thing. And on the flip side, I also help people build sustainable lives by really enabling them to work with their cycle instead of against. And so how I got here, how I landed here, maybe a lot of people have this story, but I was on the pill for 10 years. I was told that I would never get off of my antidepressants. I was diagnosed with anxiety and depression pretty soon after I started the pill. And I got kind of an inkling to come off of it, just to try. And I came off and it was like a veil had been lifted. Like the fog was like finally clear from my mind. I never went back on my meds since, which meds are life-saving. But for me, I'm thinking that it was mostly due to the birth control that I was on. So I went on this big healing journey because for my whole life struggled with self-esteem, anxiety, depression, disordered eating, and it felt like menstrual cycle awareness was that final puzzle piece to understanding my body. And then on the other hand, I really needed to have a way to not get pregnant when I came off the pill. And so I was looking into options, fell in love with fertility awareness. I love learning about the science and the biology of our ovulatory cycle. And I love how interesting and magical cervical mucus is. And so I got certified in fertility awareness, and here I am now.
Amazing. I love that journey. And I'm sure as a younger kid or even a teenager, you probably didn't know that you were going to be talking about cervical mucus all over the internet and people like eating it up and loving it, because I think such a huge piece is, and I talk about this with my friends all the time, with my sister all the time, even my mom, how little education we had growing up about our cycles. My mom talks about it all the time. She's like, I'm sorry I didn't teach you, but quite frankly, like, we did not know the phases of our cycle. Like, that wasn't something that she knew about. It wasn't something that we were taught in schools, which I think is wild, because it, in my opinion, women are ruled by this cycle. And I don't mean that in a you're controlled by it and you have to deal with it kind of way, but actually in this beautiful way that if you can learn and flow with it, you're ruled by it in this like divine feminine power way, not a controlled, this sucks, I can't believe I can't get out from underneath it kind of way. And if we were equipped with more education about it, I think that feeling could come sooner. I'm in my mid to late 40s, and that feeling is only just started coming into my life. I wish it's something that I had when I was in my 20s or even in my teens, as much as you can with age and wisdom and all of that. So I'm so happy that you're talking about this stuff online, because it's such an accessible place for people, women of all ages, to start learning about this information. And I do think that that's actually the rise of TikTok and Instagram and open conversations is really where this has become more commonplace to both understand and talk about. So I'd love to know, what is something that you used to believe about your cycle that you now know isn't true and has really changed things for you?
Yeah, it's so funny because I feel like it's the same kind of thread that you were just talking about. I thought for most of my life that the menstrual cycle was just a source of shame, a burden to bear. Cramps are just supposed to be inherently painful. Your PMS, your luteal phase is supposed to ruin your life. It's really something to dread and just kind of power through. And so I now know that when you honor your cycle and when you work with and tap into the powers of your cycle and work with your body, it doesn't have to feel that way. And it's really sad that there is an entire generation of women who are spread thin, in fight or flight, constantly overwhelmed, constantly anxious and burnt out and all of the things. And I don't think people necessarily see the link between pretending like your cycle and your hormones don't exist and powering through and acting like it doesn't influence you at all. And so they really struggle to realize the connection between mental health, your hormones, stress, work, and how they all work together in a way that can either set you up for feeling well-resourced in the world or feeling very depleted.
I've honestly gotten goosebumps all over my arms like already 3 or 4 times, because everything you're saying is just so on point in terms of, like, I love when you use the word honor your cycle. I think that's such a huge part of it, because we are taught, or we have been taught, in a very, I think, masculine dominated way. And I always want to clarify, I don't mean gender, male, female. I mean, we all have access to masculine and feminine energy, and it's the balance of both, or where we find the balance of both, where I think people thrive the most. But I will say, in our schools, in our work systems, in general, in society, it tends to be a masculine dominated approach where it is go, 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 push through, do, produce. And I talk about this all the time on this podcast because that's where I found my downfall, where I hit my deep burnout and what I have been healing and recovering from for the past 5+ years. And so when we think about needing to meet this success driven, producing, overdoing, filling our lives up with so much stuff, it feels like our cycles are, like you mentioned, a burden to that. It's like, well, if I'm in my luteal phase and I should be slowing down, well, I can't, because work doesn't allow for that. I don't go into work and say, sorry, it's my luteal week, I'm going to chill this week, or whatever that is in life. And so it does feel almost like an annoyance sometimes. Like I'll even say, coming here, I am, I think, like a couple days before my period right now. And I was like, all I want to do is lie in bed. Like, I'm so tired and I'm annoyed that I'm feeling tired right now because I have so much work to do and I really need to push through this week. And so even myself, who's like trying to honor my cycles as much as possible, I do feel sometimes frustrated and annoyed by it. So I, again, love that word honor that you use, because it reminds us that it is not only beautiful to honor it, but it is an honor to be a female and have a 28-day cycle, have this that we flow through each month, and different phases that can teach us different things. So I would love if you could chat a little bit more about that. Maybe for someone out there who's actually brand new to cycles, to cycle syncing, to understanding that, what are the different phases and what do they represent to you if we are honoring them?
Yeah, ooh, good question. So if you are totally brand spanking new to the menstrual cycle, you can kind of think of them as the 4 seasons, and I'll briefly go through them. So we start with our bleed. That is the first day of your true full bleed. That is day 1 of your cycle. And that is when you enter your inner winter. And your hormones, estrogen and progesterone, are at their lowest. And this is a time to turn inward, to hibernate, to really rest as much as you can. Doesn't mean you need to go live in the woods for a week, but where can you find pockets of stillness and rest and really turning inward during this period? Your energy might be low, you might be tender all over, you're obviously bleeding, maybe cramping, and you're really shedding both physically and energetically. It's a really potent time for intuition, for creative wisdom, for downloads, if you do that kind of thing. But the caveat is that you kind of need to slow down in order to listen to your inner wisdom. Because if you're rushing through and you're pretending like your period doesn't exist, you might miss some of that magic. Think blankets, think laying on your bed and staring at the ceiling. Think doing things that are just going to feel really nourishing for you.
Yeah.
And then as you finish menstruation, you enter your pre-ovulatory phase. And this is your inner spring. Estrogen starts to rise during this phase. And with that, you feel like you're bringing fresh energy, curiosity, and creativity. You know, I live in Toronto, or I used to live in Toronto, but I live in Ontario. And winters are hard. They're dark and long. And then you see the grass starting to peak up, the first flowers of spring. That is the feeling of pre-ovulation. It's hopeful. It's energized. It's like, ooh, what can I do with this phase or for this cycle? Yeah. And so this is really about new beginnings every single time. We have 12 new starts every single year. And it's like you kind of want to just see what you want to do, where you want to spend your focus on in this time of your cycle. And then as estrogen really starts to peak, you enter your ovulatory phase or ovulation. This is your inner summer. And this is like the most perfect summer day where you go to the park, there's people everywhere just enjoying life, and there's blankets, and you're eating a peach, and everything just feels right in the world. And this can be what ovulation brings. Your estrogen is peaking, and you're getting ready to release that egg, and so you feel magnetic, you are expressive and confident, and this is kind of one of those phases where you can access the most embodied version of yourself. And communication feels easier, life generally feels easier, and it's a great time to also be pretty social if you're a sociable kind of person. Then, the last phase, your luteal phase or your premenstrual phase, is your inner fall. And this can come with a little bit of shock if you really thrive in your luteal phase, because this is a phase where, you know, if ovulation, your rose-colored glasses were on, now in your luteal phase, your rose-colored glasses are off. You're going to see through BS. Things are being shown clear to you, although you have to take everything with a bit of a grain of salt. So here, progesterone is on the rise, and that makes us want to nest and get all nice and cozy and prepare for winter or prepare for a potential pregnancy, because in this phase, your body doesn't know if it's pregnant or not. And so energy is turning inward. We might have a healthy dose or a maybe not so healthy dose of honesty. And it's really a truth-telling phase if you want it, if you work with it that way, because you're really seeing clearly what's working or what's not. Oh, maybe working till 11 o'clock at night every night worked in on your ovulation, but in this phase, it no longer works. And so it's really a time to prune the leaves, get honest, and then prepare for winter.
Love how you just presented all of that. Like, it feels so aligned and connected. And one thing I'll compare it to is I remember for years when the time would change in the fall and it would get darker earlier, I would feel so low. And every year it would come on, I'd feel so low. And then one fall, I decided, instead of pushing through and trying to like keep the summer energy going and, you know, ignore the fact that it was getting darker earlier and still be social and working late and whatever it was, I decided to just give in and surrender to the hibernation feeling that I was getting, even though in my mind it didn't quite make sense because it was October and it wasn't winter yet and whatever. Gave into it, and magically I wasn't feeling so low. And it had this like major aha moment for me, because I was like, oh, if I actually surrender to the different seasons that happen all over life, the actual seasons that we follow in nature, I would say especially here in Canada, because we really do have pretty much 4 true seasons, although spring tends to be getting shorter and shorter these years. But if we really surrender to that as well in our every month cycle, there's a lightness that happens that comes with it. So I think one of the things that a lot of women struggle with, myself included, was pushing against this natural cycle. Like you said, these different seasons that happen every month for us. And when I was trying to push through, which sometimes has to happen because our systems, like we said, are not built to necessarily flow with that cycle. But when I was constantly pushing through during my luteal phase, trying to like produce and do, and then feeling worse because of it, once I started surrendering and saying, you know what, I'm actually going to cancel that thing that I can cancel. I'm going to get into bed, even though it's a gorgeous sunny day, and I am just going to give myself space to rest and relax and lay, essentially. It becomes so much easier. So I'm just so glad that you described it the way you did, because it sounded beautiful and romantic, first of all.
Yeah, but I do just want to note that what I just described, of course, that is some people experience. It can't be for everyone.
Yeah.
Not everyone's going to experience the phases their way. This is a framework we're not following rigid rules. And I think people often get caught up on rules and how you're supposed to feel. No, I give you as a little guide, and you get to listen deeper and realize what actually you feel like in the phase and what you can kind of leave behind.
So well put, because it is like, I have an all or nothing personality myself, and I am very much like, oh, well, that's what it says it should be. And then when it's not, I'm like, well, what's wrong with me? That's not how things are happening. And I also think, and we were talking about this just before we started recording, I think it is also very different depending what age you're at as well. Not only age, but also what part of life you're in, whether you're dealing with extra levels of stress or not. But I have been talking to my friends a lot more recently about kind of nearing our 40s. I'm 36 now, almost 37. We're nearing our 40s, and finding these phases and the things that are happening in the phases perhaps feel more pronounced. Is that legitimately something that happens as you get older? The things that happen during luteal that happen for me, for example, the biggest thing that I have experienced, and it's so pronounced for me, is the shift between ovulation, like pre-post ovulation. So the day before I ovulate, I'm high as a kite. I'm like, life is unbelievable. I wake up not 8 hours later and I am raging with the world. My fuse is so short, and I never noticed that intense of a switch before. Is that actually to do with age?
Your cycles do tend to get more spicy as you age, especially getting to your late 30s, into your 40s. That's when perimenopause can start, although it can start later in your 40s as well. And so your cycles can be a little bit more unpredictable. Your progesterone might be lower, which would kind of impact your luteal phase. Energy dips are harder. Your moods might be all over the place. Periods start getting a little bit different, heavier or shorter. And could be the start of perimenopause, not always. It can also be the way that your hormones are reacting to your environment and the systems that we are in.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we can automatically be like, oh, my hormones are getting worse. They're working against me. But can we start to think like, okay, this is information. This is our body trying to tell us something. Hormones don't go rogue often just for the hell of it.
Yeah.
They are responsive. Your hormones don't exist in a vacuum. And so what's your stress levels? What kind of environment are you in? What is your nutrition, your sleep, your boundaries, your unmet needs? What is all of that stuff? If something feels off, it's just like, oh, okay, is this a pattern? Is it a reoccurring pattern? Okay, let's dig a little bit deeper and think about some ways that we can make things feel a little bit easier.
Yeah, love it. As that, like, symptoms as signals instead of something to be like frustrated with, to be like, oh, okay, this is information. How can I dig into it? But on that note, for people who are like, okay, I know my symptoms and I understand that they're signals, how do I then start digging? What would be your first few steps that you would recommend to someone who, like, for example, like me, just said, luteal phase is a real struggle for me. I'm super low, like I have no energy, or that common thing that I hear from so many women, I get like 1, maybe 2 good weeks a month, the rest suck. What would be that first sort of step you would recommend they take?
Yeah, so first realize that the 1 or 2 good weeks a month is actually not normal. Your body should not be feeling like that. That's actually a sign that your body is screaming, and you don't actually have to settle for that. And so the first step is, okay, we're tracking. We must be tracking in some capacity. Tracking, but not just, for me, not just putting in symptoms into your app and then never looking at them again. We kind of want to see them from a broad lens. So my opinion, we should be charting our cycle. And so we are paying attention to our period, how long they are, how heavy, any symptoms that are appearing. And then you are noticing your cervical mucus. Are you experiencing cervical mucus? Are you experiencing a clear shift towards ovulation, or are you not really experiencing any mucus anymore? That's a signal. You know, estrogen could be a little bit low. Then you are tracking your basal body temperature. Okay, you might be bleeding every month, but are you ovulating? You can bleed and not ovulate. And so confirming ovulation with BBT, or your basal body temperature, because your temperature is going to rise after you've ovulated. Okay, so now we're halfway through our cycle. Is your luteal phase symptoms lining up to your ovulatory phase? Okay, that's fine. And then we want to look at your luteal phase. Are you having a short luteal phase? Are you spotting before your period? If you're spotting for more than 1 or 2 days, it could be a sign of low progesterone. If you're experiencing luteal phase symptoms that are very much interfering with your life, that could also be a sign of low progesterone, and cortisol often dampens progesterone production. Progesterone is a natural anti-anxiety, a natural nervous system soother. And so when we have high levels of cortisol, your progesterone production gets dampened. Okay, so now we've taken it from tracking to charting, and we can see our symptoms from a full lens. Then we can start to dig in deeper. Are you eating breakfast 30 to 60 minutes when you wake up? Does it have a source of protein, or are you grabbing a sip of coffee and not eating? Are you grazing throughout the day, or are you nourishing yourself? Because in the luteal phase in particular, since I know you struggle with that, you're more susceptible to blood sugar roller coaster rides that can very closely resemble PMS symptoms. So are we skipping meals? Are we eating regularly? Are we having carbs, protein, healthy fats? And then we can also begin to dig into stress. How are you responding to your stress? Is your nervous system regulated? Are you just getting up and going throughout your day? How are you handling your stress? And one final one is boundaries and people pleasing. People pleasing is something that people often don't realize can impact their cycle. And so are we saying yes to everything? Are you holding in what you actually think? Because that is going to send cortisol up, and that is going to dampen progesterone. And if you are constantly overriding your needs for other people, that can have a direct influence on your cycle.
I adore everything you just said there. And 2 things I want to highlight. I feel like I'm going to say that to every answer that you have, but 2 things I really want to highlight. One is this idea of maybe confusing symptoms like blood sugar issues, for example, with PMS symptoms. And I think that, and the reason maybe why I'm so piqued by that is because I think that's something I deal with very much as someone who's neurodivergent and struggles to sometimes stop and eat. If I'm hyper focused on something, or just in general, eating is not I shouldn't say it's not a priority, because I love food. I love to eat, but eating at regular intervals and good times for keeping my blood sugar in a good place doesn't tend to get prioritized as much as it should. And my partner will be the first person to say this, because it drives him crazy that, like, he'll be like, have you eaten? And I'm like, I will in a minute. He's like, no, get up from your desk and go and eat. And like, I get frustrated, but I'm so grateful for him, because I notice, and I hadn't put these 2 together, but all of a sudden I'm irritable. I'm annoyed. I'm like, nobody talk to me. Like, how dare you ask me a question right now? I'm overwhelmed. And I'm like, haven't eaten.
Yeah.
That is why. And I used to be very confused by why all of a sudden I was so annoyed and angry. Must be my hormones, must be this. And it was like, oh no, you just haven't eaten. And it seems almost too simple, but it's like, that's the fuel. That's what we need to run through our days.
I know. It's literally one of those things where sometimes having a good breakfast in the morning, like if there's one thing you want to change, just have a good breakfast.
Seriously, I used to be like, I'm not a breakfast person kind of person. Now it's like, oh no, if I haven't eaten, like that has to be the priority. My whole day like revolves around breakfast. For me, a savory breakfast, so I'm not starting with sugar. And yes, really trying to focus on protein. Now, listen, do I always hit that right? No, but generally, like, I'm quite strict with that now. And I do think it has made quite a significant difference. And now I just need to work on the lunch part of like not eating breakfast and then waiting till 4 p.m. to eat again.
It's hard. It's hard. You think that this stuff should come easy to you, but it doesn't always, and that's okay.
Yeah. And that's the thing. And that is okay. And then what kind of structures or systems can we put into our day without overloading structures and systems? Sorry. I do think that there are still, do you need to put an alarm on your phone to remind you to eat? It seems crazy to say that at 36 years old, that I need an alarm on my phone to remind me to eat. But if it works, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Use the things that work. So yeah, eating, huge thing. huge thing, and it can shift things quite quickly, I think. So I'd love to understand, I feel like you have shed fantastic light on how we can honor the different phases of our cycle and how many things can come up and how to look at, like you said, our overall symptoms and get a big picture idea. And while I think that that is so important for each person to take their own sort of agency and power with their own cycles to see what they can do, I'd also love to talk about it a little bit more from a systemic standpoint. And what I mean by that is, what would you, with all the information you have about cycles, cycle syncing, and how different women work, how would you redesign systems of school or work to help women work with their cycles in a more cohesive way?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think we have to acknowledge that the entire system is built on patriarchal, capitalist, colonial systems that are not built for most people in the world. And we can see those effects every day in almost every single person. The hustle and productivity culture is actually ruining people's lives. But if I'm going to dream, ruining people's lives. Okay, let's dream. But if we're going to dream here for a minute, then in terms of specifically to women and menstruators, I think that in terms of work and school, maybe something that they could do is have built-in rest. So instead of feeling like rest is a source of like shame or like you're weak, maybe it's paid menstrual leave or flexible work from home options. Maybe it's slower start days or being able to have meetings off camera, or quiet weeks built into team calendars and maybe allowing that space to have a quieter week. I know that isn't always possible, but is there a little bit of more padding and support for people who are literally bleeding? You know?
Yeah.
Another thing that I was thinking about is a more compassionate team culture. So encouraging self-awareness and body literacy and energy levels into the conversation already. Okay, what kind of energy can you bring this week? And honoring that and working with each other. We're dreaming, right? It's not always going to be sustainable and doable, but maybe just simply acknowledging the different energies that people in the teams have can honor your menstrual cycle and reduce burnout. And then the last thing I'm thinking about is flexible deadlines and task design.
Yes.
Again, not always doable. But instead of viewing productivity from a very linear kind of way, allowing for non-linear productivity, because not everyone's going to feel the same way every day. Not everyone's going to show up in the same capacity. But maybe instead of a week or a day, we think we zoom out and it's more of a month. So giving buffer room for deadlines, allowing people to actually work with their rhythm, not being so micromanagey, and designing tasks with the energetic weight in mind and that kind of thing. Those are some things that I was thinking. What do you think?
I actually so agree with everything you just said there. Like, what's so beautiful about it, which it ties to what you just said previous to that, is like all of us as humans, I think, are suffering under the weight of this like hyper productivity hustle culture that we've gotten ourselves into. So what you just suggested there, I think applies to everyone, not just women who are menstruating or people who are menstruating and experiencing their cycles, that space for rest. Build in space for rest. Don't book your days out so full that you can't see when you're going to be able to take a break for the next 4 to 6 weeks. I have been doing this for multiple years in my business, and it doesn't happen all at once. And that's, I think, also really important, is like, you're not going to go from working 5 days a week to maybe working 4 days a week, only 5 hours a day, and being able to take rotating days off as you need to. I started by just saying, I'm not starting my work day before 10 a.m. because I know I love a slow morning. I need to get breakfast in. I need to get some movement in to set myself up for the day, to manage my stress levels, all of that, which for me means I'm not someone who's going to wake up at 5 in the morning to be able to do that before a 9 a.m. start. So I started implementing 10 a.m. starts in my workday, 11 a.m. starts for meetings. And then that's just how I started. And it was scary to start that at the beginning. I was like, I can't believe I'm going to tell clients that I can't meet with them till 11 a.m. People are not going to want to work with me. Not true. An example of this is I worked in event production for so many years. And towards the end of my time when I was fully producing events, I started really like booking vacations, not worrying about when events were going to fall or if I was going to get a job and then have to cancel that vacation. I was booking the vacations. And then, of course, someone would come in and be like, hey, we have this event and it's happening on this dates. And I'd be like, I'm so sorry, I'm traveling. And they'd be like, honestly, it doesn't matter. We don't need you on site. We'd love you just to do pre-production. And I'm like, wait, what? Like, so these things are possible as you sort of build your business to start like putting the boundaries in that work for you. And these boundaries that I'm talking about aren't necessarily for everyone, but that padding, that rest, I think is so important that we are creating space in our weeks, even in our days where we have free time. And if your energy levels are high, fill that free time with work, with whatever you want. But if they are not, then you're saying, okay, I actually have space in my day where I could go lay on the couch for a little bit and rest, or even just work from the couch rather than working from your desk if you can. That was a game changer for me to be able to just sit on the couch and work and snuggle up instead of being up at a desk. It seems so simple, made a huge difference. The other thing that I have implemented, which I think should be implemented everywhere, is breaking up my task list into essential and optional. And then also I use Notion personally for my sort of task organization, project management. I assign energy levels to tasks. So it's low, medium, high, so I can see my day or see my planning out and being like, whoa, I have 5 high energy things in one day. There's no way. I know I'm not going to get through that. I can move things around. So, and I think what's beautiful is like, yes, we have this dream of how we'd like to see all maybe corporate culture shift to, but these are things that you can implement even if you do work a 9 to 5 and you work for someone else and your schedule isn't necessarily as much your own to manage as you'd like. You can create some space in your days. You can add in this rest. You can add in a flow for your tasks that works with your natural energy ebbs and flows rather than against it.
Literally. If you really don't have any control over your day, I always like to ask, okay, what do you have control over then? Like after work or before work, what do you do? How can you honor your cycle outside of the 9 to 5? And that really makes a difference as well.
Yeah, it's true, because it's not just about changing your work schedule. It's how are you filling your weekends? Are they packed when you're feeling exhausted? Or, you know, when I was cycle syncing, I really started looking at like what social things I was saying yes and no to at what times of the month, mostly for other people's benefit, because I would just be a little bit miserable if I showed up. But overall benefit everyone involved. So I'd love to kind of shift gears a little bit and talk more about ovulation and tracking ovulation and how it sort of impacts your period. Because I think, and I definitely used to think this, that like it was my period that set up the rest of my cycle. But what I've come to learn is it's actually ovulation and when you ovulate that indicates when you're going to bleed. Is that correct? That I've understood that?
Yes, you make me so happy.
And that was huge for me because once I started tracking my cycle and actually as I've been, you know, building up to sort of prepare my body for pregnancy, which I have been taking very seriously for years. It's something that I knew I wanted to do in terms of preparing my body from a working out perspective, from a stress levels perspective, as well as understanding when I'm ovulating so that I can get pregnant. And I started tracking things. I only then realized that like, oh, if I ovulate late, then my period is late, for example. Those things kind of move together on the calendar. So I'd love to learn a little bit more about ovulation and this fertility awareness method that you have been talking about.
Yes. So exactly what you're saying. We really should not be calling it a menstrual cycle. It gives the period too much credit. We should be calling it the ovulation or the ovulatory cycle, because the entire point of a cycle is to ovulate. And so before ovulation, your body is, you know, growing the follicle that contains your egg. It is producing fertile types of mucus so that sperm can survive. It is gearing up for that follicle to release the egg. And then if you ovulate late, your period is not going to come, because the first half of your cycle, the follicular phase, from day 1 of your period until ovulation, that is the most variable in length, and ovulation can be impacted by stress, by travel, by sickness, by things like PCOS. And so if ovulation gets pushed, then the second half of your cycle, your luteal phase, is also going to be pushed because you're not in it. And so the luteal phase is pretty fixed in length, and it's typically, anywhere between 10 and 16 days is a normal luteal phase, although you're going to have a pretty standard luteal phase. So if your luteal phase is 11 days, it is most likely going to be 11 days every single cycle, give or take a day or two.
Got it. Okay. Interesting. And again, isn't that crazy that like I'm learning this at 35 years old when I learned it, that like, oh, my cycle is actually based on when I ovulate, not. And the other thing that I find so crazy is that one of the main things we're taught as women about our cycle is like, don't get pregnant. And here's how to avoid pregnancy. Get on the pill, obviously use different birth control methods, which are very important, but you can only actually get pregnant. Technically, it's 5 days, right, in your cycle. And even some of those days, the percentage is really low.
Yes. So it's like a little bit nuanced because, of course, we're going to get a little bit nerdy for a second. But yes, pregnancy is only possible for around 5 or 6 days per cycle. However, when you start producing fertile mucus, if you see any type of mucus before ovulation, you treat it as fertile because you don't actually know when you're going to ovulate. So say you start producing fertile mucus on day 10 of your cycle, but you don't ovulate until day 20. That whole time is technically your fertile window, although you can really only get pregnant from 15 to 21. But because you don't actually know when you're going to ovulate, you treat that whole window as your fertile window.
Right. Okay. I grew up, at least, and I think a lot of women grew up thinking, oh, you can get pregnant at any time of your cycle. Like I even remember, like, if I have like an oopsie when I was having sex with someone, condom broke, or maybe made a poor decision to not use a condom and then went and got plan B, I never really fully knew that like maybe that there were specific times in my cycle where I wouldn't need plan B because there's no way that I could have gotten pregnant. I just didn't have that information until I actually started tracking my cycle for the purpose of trying to get pregnant, and therefore was like, oh, I really need to understand when I ovulate, because if we were just having sex anytime outside of that, the chances are going to be super, super low to zero that I'm going to get pregnant. But like, so tracking your ovulation is so important, not just if you want to get pregnant, but also if you don't want to get pregnant, because there's really only a short window, like you're saying, that you could get pregnant. And I guess part of why I'm saying that is because as someone who took the pill and it really didn't work for me, hormonal birth control pill was really not great for me, and also has not been for my sister and other members of my family. I was just super depressed, like severely depressed. That wasn't an option for me, and condoms aren't always the safest method if they break or whatever. There is another option, I guess is what I'm saying here, which I'd love for you to talk about, that you're not just stuck if you don't want to take hormonal birth control.
Yes. So first of all, only about 13% of women know how to accurately identify their fertile window, which is very sad. And even if you time things perfect in terms of sex and wanting to get pregnant, you only have about a 25% chance, which
Crazy.
Is wild. And so fertility awareness is a natural birth control method that helps you understand when you are fertile and when you are not. It works to track ovulation. And when done correctly, it is about as effective as birth control, as hormonal birth control, which people often don't believe, but the science actually is there, and it's, up to 99% effective. And so our bodies are always speaking a language, and we just have not been taught to listen to it at all. When we learn this language, when we know how to read our ovulatory signs, when we can open our fertile window with confidence and close our fertile window, we can know how to avoid or to achieve pregnancy. And so if you are just listening to this, basically the time before ovulation is the time where pregnancy is really possible, and ovulation can vary, and so your follicular phase can come with more risk, right? However, if you are in your luteal phase and you have confirmed ovulation with your cervical mucus and your basal body temperature, and you are safely in your luteal phase with a closed fertile window, as your fertility awareness method would have the rules of how to close that fertile window, then pregnancy is no longer possible because your body is in this limbo, in this state of, okay, I'm going to start producing progesterone because I'm going to maintain my uterine lining in case an egg does get fertilized. So that entire time, your luteal phase is a time where you're considered infertile because your body is producing cervical mucus that is thick, and it forms a mucus plug at the base of your cervix that prevents sperm and bacteria from getting through because your body is trying to preserve and to protect a potential pregnancy if that does happen.
Wow. So like, even as you're saying these things, like I'm realizing things that happen in my body, like why they're happening, which I didn't even know, which also makes me a little embarrassed, but
no embarrassment.
No, that's true. That's fair. But just like, it's wild. And I just feel like if I have daughters, I just hope that I will handle this so differently and help them understand their bodies in a way that empowers them to make the decisions that they want to make, whatever those are. And know that like, if they want to go on hormonal birth control and try that, of course. But what I love about what you do and what you share is that there is another option, because growing up, I didn't think there was. I just thought there was birth control or
pregnancy. People always say, if you're not on birth control, then you are trying. That is not true. It's actually gaslighting, because that is not true. And it comes from people's lack of understanding of the menstrual cycle across all sides, across the board.
1,000,000%. And also, like, I just want to say so clearly for anyone listening, like, I went through the experience of hormonal birth control and how devastating that was to like my emotions and my thoughts and everything. And if it doesn't work for you, like, there's not anything wrong with you, and trust your body. You don't have to put yourself through, I think, as you mentioned, Cait, at the beginning there, like depression that is caused by being on synthetic hormones. If you want to, and if that doesn't affect you in that way, beautiful. The beauty is, in most situations, that women have the choice to do what they want to their body, however works best for them in the season that they're in. That includes knowing that you can be careful with your fertility, with getting pregnant, without putting synthetic hormones into your body. That is an option. And I just like wish more women knew that, and earlier. I wish I had known when I was in university that I didn't have to try synthetic hormones, and that I didn't have to go through the deep, severe depression I went through when I was on them. Like, I mean, me and my friend joke about it to this day, but like, I was living in Montreal for the summer, and my friend and I were going out for like a pool day, and she came downstairs to my bedroom and found me sitting on my bed, completely despondent, not home, essentially, trying to figure out what to wear, what to put in my body, because also the birth control had made me gain weight and things like that. And I was so low, and she was like, okay, like, let's try and fix this. Like, let's find you a bathing suit you feel good in, and we can go out and have a good day. But this is almost 20 years later, and I still remember that day so clearly, because I wasn't in my body anymore. I was like, it felt so weird, and it's just, I didn't know, kind of thing. And I just wish more women knew that they can make a choice, and that like, that choice doesn't just mean you have to risk getting pregnant.
Exactly. And I'm so sorry that you had that experience.
Thank you.
And that you don't know what you don't know, right? And I just think it's important just to star that if you are wanting to practice fertility awareness to avoid pregnancy naturally by charting and tracking your cycle, that it's really important that you follow an actual method, and that the efficacy of the method goes up substantially when you actually work with an instructor, because there is a lot of nuance and there are rules and a certain way of doing things that often gets missed. And so when people are doing it DIY, sometimes they miss things that an instructor would not miss. And so
Yeah.
I always say that working with an instructor is like basically imperative when doing fertility awareness, because it's just safer that way.
I'm so glad you said that, because I so agree. Like when I started tracking ovulation in order to get pregnant, I initially was just using my Aura ring for the temperature, which I will say super helpful for me to even start understanding my cycle and where I was at. It kind of gave me an easy way because I just put the ring on and it does it automatically. But then when I got more serious about being like, okay, I actually want to know exactly the day that I'm ovulating because we want to start trying, I then started using ovulation tests. It was showing that it wasn't quite accurate. The day that my temperature, I guess, was spiking or whatever, those days were off. So again, I was like, oh, okay. You can't rely on just like perhaps one thing. And like you said, I probably, even as we're having this conversation, I'm realizing even with the temperature and the tests, I still think that there's more that I need to know. So
can I tell you something?
Yes, please.
Like,
literally, as you were talking, I was like, because that was one of the questions I wanted to ask you, is like, okay, the tests, how accurate are those? And yeah.
So whether you're avoiding or achieving pregnancy, the only thing that is going to open your fertile window is cervical mucus. When you start producing fertile types of cervical mucus, and it doesn't always just look egg white, it can be just a sensation, that is when you know estrogen is rising and you can now keep sperm alive. And then when estrogen peaks, that is when your LH is going to surge. LH is going to surge approximately 12 to 48 hours before ovulation. That is when you can use those tests. After ovulation, that is when your BBT or your temperature will rise, and we're looking for at least 3 higher temps over the previous 6 lower temps. So it works together as a whole picture. Okay, opening the fertile window, LH is going to tell you when you're getting closer, and then your BBT is going to tell you that you've actually confirmed it. And so LH alone is not really all that helpful. Of course, if you're trying to get pregnant, you probably want to have sex that day because ovulation is near. But there's a whole window before that where you could be trying and knowing that ovulation is near and sperm can survive. And BBT alone to avoid or achieve pregnancy is just batshit crazy because it doesn't and a lot of people do it, but it only tells you when you've closed your fertile window.
That's the thing too that is like crazy to me, is like, okay, again, I think when I had no idea, I wasn't tracking my cycle at all, didn't have any clue when ovulation could be or even when to expect my period after I took my IUD out, the temperature started giving me at least some sort of like guidepost to work towards. But then I learned, oh no, that's actually, for me, because I was looking to achieve pregnancy, I was like, oh no, that's actually when you've already ovulated and it's too late kind of thing. So again, it's just what you're talking about on the internet so that it is accessible for women to start learning that these things, even when we think, oh, okay, well, I'm starting to track my basal body temperature, that's great. Oh, I didn't even realize that actually that means I've already ovulated. So if I'm trying to get pregnant and I see my spike and then start having sex, I've missed my whole window.
Yeah.
Which could lead to so much frustration for women not being able to get pregnant.
Literally. There's a lot to know. It's one of those things where there's a lot of misinformation and a lot of people just not doing things quite so correctly on both sides. And again, just working with an instructor is helpful.
Huge. And I'm like, I really will say that because even as someone who thinks that I have educated myself fairly well on this stuff over the past few years, this conversation alone and listening to your content that you put out has really educated me that there's so much more to it and you can go so much deeper. So yes, I would 1000% back working with an instructor to, like you said, either use the fertility awareness method to avoid pregnancy or perhaps use it to achieve and not try to like DIY the information from different places.
No hodgepodging.
No. And some people don't know what they're talking about, and it's not even malicious. They don't realize what they don't know that they are sharing. So definitely work with a certified instructor like Cait if this is something of interest to you, which I do think, again, every woman should choose what is right for their own body. But in my own experience as someone who is sometimes ruled by the spike and lows of my hormones. Certain birth control methods never worked for me. And it's beautiful to learn that there are other options out there that can be as accurate. Like you said, it's not even like you're having to compromise on accuracy.
No.
Which is amazing. All right. As you can tell, I've gotten very excited in this episode. This is something that obviously as a woman, it is really close to my heart, but also as someone who is in the midst of trying to get pregnant and is on a little bit of a journey with that, which I'm sure I'll share one day, but there have been some ups and some big downs. I am just so happy that you came on today, that you shared your incredible knowledge that you have built up over the years, and that I can see you so intentionally really focused on to ensure that what you're putting out there is backed by science and is the truth. Because like we just said, it's noisy out there and not everything is right. So I'm so glad women have someone that they can go to and really get the information from. And while I would love to chat and go on and on forever, we are going to have to wrap up here. But as we do with every episode, we're going to wrap up with our rapid-ish fire questions. So are you ready, Cait, for those?
I'm ready.
Okay, amazing. So what is something that you used to hide that you now lead with?
My quirky side.
I love that. Because also that's what like drew me to you online instantly was that quirky energy. I'm like, oh yeah, this is my person. So I'm so glad you started leading with that. What would you tell someone who is listening, who is currently feeling like they're perhaps drowning a little bit under the weight of their hormones, of their emotions, of the wave that they're riding, or of their physical symptoms that they're dealing with their cycle?
I would tell them that they're not alone and that a lot of people experience symptoms that really highly interfere with their life. And if it is interfering with their life, then they should seek some support and that they should track their cycle, because when you can understand when it's happening in your cycle, you can advocate for yourself in the doctor's office more and know that your doctor is just one doctor. And if you're not listened by that one doctor, there's other options out there.
Oh, thank you for saying that. All right. What do you think is something that the world needs to hear right now?
That eating peaches in the river on a sunny day is, if you can do that, life will probably be about 50% better just for that.
Yes. Yes. One of my favorite answers so far. 100%. And finally, where can people get more of you? Because I know that listeners are going to be like, oh my gosh, I need to connect with this person.
Ooh, okay, so you can find me on TikTok and on Instagram at Consciously Cait. I have a cervical mucus workshop that goes deep into cervical mucus called Nectar, and I have my one-on-one coaching program, part self-paced course, part 3-month support from a fertility awareness educator called Fam Formula, where I teach you how to track your ovulatory cycle so you can avoid pregnancy on purpose and finally understand what the heck your body is telling you.
Ugh, perfection. As always, we will have all of the links in the description so you can connect with Cait and check out her programs. Thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your wealth of wisdom. I know this is just the tip of the iceberg with what you have to share. So definitely please do check out Cait and what she has to offer.